Okay, everybody, I have on Chef James Berry here, and he has been on the podcast twice. I've actually never had a guest on here three times, but I always enjoy our conversations. We always end up talking forever and just like diving deep. I know we're both very, very passionate about health, about nutrition, and I learned a lot. The first time you came on, it was actually when I learned to start like grading frozen liver into food. That was my like really first introduction into organ meats, and now we'll eat like cow heart and all sorts of stuff so that I didn't know that we would ever eat. So I'm really excited to have you back on. We're going to be talking about like some nutrition. We're going to be talking about I'm going to mispronounce it, lingual neural response, and then just some trying to get nutrient dense foods into our kids. We know that our food pyramid here is absolute trash. So, going against that and getting back to nature and intuition and how to really feed our kids foods that are going to, that they can use, that are dense and that their body needs. So, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Absolutely. I love our conversation. So I'm very happy to be here with you.
Yeah. So right before I hit record, we started chatting. Then I was like, let me hit record so we can talk about this. I was telling him how I started working with a functional practitioner because I just knew some stuff was off in my body, and I I found out that I'm very depleted in vitamin A. Which can make sense, like having pregnant, your body uses a lot of vitamin A in pregnancy. Actually, in your third trimester, your vitamin A needs go up 30%, like, or you need three times more vitamin A, like in your third trimester. And that's not information that providers are just handing out or that we readily know. I actually learned that from interviewing people on the podcast. And so I know that I'm vitamin A deficient. So one way to get vitamin A in your diet is through
Organ
organ
meats.
meats. Yeah.
Yeah, liver in particular. Liver and also spleen. Spleen is also really high in vitamin A.
I've never had spleen.
Well,
Um,
you've had pluck and spleen is in pluck.
there you go. I guess I have. I have had both of them. Um, but I do have a question. So like to get vitamin, because I feel like I have been eating vitamin A rich foods. I mean, I eat a ton of eggs. We eat a lot of grass-fed red meat. Um, or yeah, just those types of foods. But I do incorporate liver. There's actually a farm that I order from locally that they grind up half liver, half ground beef. And you can buy it like by the pound. So it's like half and half, which I just find like works better for my family just to kind of disguise the flavor. But if we're talking about like, I guess, ancestral diet, how much liver were they actually eating though? Because if you kill an entire animal, I feel like you were just getting liver like once every few months.
If that, I mean, yeah, it's such a great question. And I'm so glad this is where we're starting because ultimately we do have a conflict of terms happening, right? Everyone keeps talking about, oh, I'm carnivore, or I'm ancestral, but there's no ancestral society that only ate ribeyes and liver. Like that just didn't exist, right? Because basically, if you think about it, if you had an ancestral society, let's just say it's a tribe of like 21 people, not a huge tribe, but big enough to survive, you'd have your hunters go out. They would fast before they went out because fasting heightened their senses so that
Mm,
it enabled them to hunt and kill that animal easier and kind of almost made them a little super powered because everything just gets so heightened. Um, it could take them a week, could take them longer, and they would then kill the animal. And the first thing they would do to replenish their stores is to eat the heart or the liver raw. So
mhm,
technically, that animal's coming back because they only have one liver, one heart. It's coming back with none of that,
mhm,
most likely, And so you get back to the tribe, to the hearth, and now the focus is less on a singular organ and more on the whole animal. And I think that's what we forget is that, as I just mentioned, so iron, for example, we focus on beef liver, but beef spleen has 5 times as much iron as liver. So it's really the whole animal. If you look at the whole animal, and as long as you're getting a little of everything, you're getting what you need. And as you pointed out, then next time they kill an animal, maybe you get something else. Maybe, and then they're also cooking things down. They're they're stewing bones and parts of the animals that have to break down through slow cooking. So you're getting cartilage, you're getting all these elements of the food that you just don't get if you're only eating ribeye and then some liver. You just don't
Hmm.
get everything. And another thing is we have to think about how we prepare these foods as well, right? So if people are barbecuing their steaks, their muscle meat, and they're let's say putting that rub around it, and we've all seen photos of it where the barbecue meat is just black. Well,
Hmm.
that's carcinogenic. Like you just made that meat not healthy. And I'm not saying, look, I love barbecue. I'll be the first. I go to Texas, I get barbecue left and right, right? And I love brisket, which is always blackened on the outside. So I'm not saying that you should never eat that way because obviously it's very flavorful and whatnot. But let's not pretend it's healthy. It's
Hmm.
not.
Hmm.
So even in that instance, here someone might think, "Oh, I'm eating tons of meat. I'm getting the nutrients." It's like, no, you're not, because the longer you cook that meat, you're destroying a lot of those minerals and vitamins. You're degrading it. It's not going to be as nutrient dense. And then depending on how you cook it, how you prepare it, what you eat with it, who knows what you're getting. So how we combine foods is really, really important. Like Sally Fallon of Weston A. Price will talk about when you cook liver to make a pate, she recommends cooking it in lard because lard is high in vitamin D, and vitamin D helps you absorb the A.
Hmm.
They go together, but
Hmm.
you wouldn't get that if you weren't cooking in lard.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I mean, there's so many fad diets that come out, and carnivore is like a huge one. And I always feel like anybody's going to feel different anytime that they try an extreme diet. Like you're going to get results because there's some sort of elimination there. Like any extreme diet that you're on is eliminating alcohol, is eliminating sugar, is eliminating, some sort of inflammatory foods or things like that. My
I whole
philosophy. Oh, go
I
ahead.
wholeheartedly agree with you. Yeah, wholeheartedly.
Yeah. And my philosophy is still just like I'm too stressed out being a mom right now to like three kids that I had in 3 years and like trying to nourish myself that it's just like do the best that you can and try to avoid processed foods, make sure you're getting in protein. I really try to like balance my blood sugar at every meal and with my snacks. I aim for 30 to 40 grams for breakfast every morning. Um, I've noticed that that's made a huge difference. I started that almost 2 years ago now. I was pregnant. No, yeah, 2 years ago. My second was like 6 months old. So I noticed that that made like a huge difference. But anything extreme for me right now is just like off the table, but it's just like, let's make sure that we're getting in whole foods. Let's make sure that we're avoiding processed as much as we can. Trying to not do as much packaged stuff or whatever it is. And I mean, we go out to eat like maybe once a month just because I love cooking and like I don't really like eating out. Like I would rather make a burger at home than order one somewhere just because I also know what it's cooked in. I know what it's made of. I know that the ketchup I'm putting on it isn't high fructose corn. I just feel better about it. But it's still fun to go out, right? Like it's fun to go out to eat. And just like as a family, we maybe do it like once a month. Um,
That's
so
good. That's really good. I mean, you're hitting all the points, right?
mhm.
You're doing what seems right for you and your family. And I think if anything, there's this author, he's a professor of archaeology. His name's Dr. Bill Schindler, and he wrote a book called Eat Like a Human. He's got a great quote about how we are the only species in the world that looks to someone else to tell us what to eat. And that always makes me pause a little bit, but it even more so makes me pause when you consider that there's nearly 9 million species in the world. So out of nearly 9 million species, we're the only one that doesn't know how to eat anymore.
Yeah.
And that's really alarming. And I think in many ways, that's what you're talking about is like, I'm a mom, I'm overwhelmed. I've got three kids. I'm overwhelmed just in my life and let alone like it's confusing out there when you go to the grocery store and all the noise that we're getting, pummeled with daily about what we should be eating, what's new on the market, how this new health food is supposed to be helping you with XYZ. And it's just the constant marketing, the busy schedules, the difficulty of being a parent in modern times with where we're somewhat so alone and isolated, even though I know some people do have support out there, but it just feels very isolating sometimes. Um, I think that all just kind of like accumulates with us feeling just like, I don't know what to eat. And I think you're already focusing on the things that we should all be thinking about, which is you cannot be healthy eating out. Like it's literally impossible unless you're extremely wealthy and can eat at
Yeah.
those farm to table restaurants every single meal, every
Mm-hmm.
time you eat out, because they are very expensive. Then maybe you could be healthy. But most restaurants are cutting corners because they're trying to make a profit. Like just like the grocery stores, the restaurants are also profiteers. They need to make profit. And how do you make profit? Well, you use the cheapest ingredient you can. You focus on one ingredient that's kind of like the the draw, to pull people in. So maybe that's we have grass-fed beef, or maybe it's pastured pork, or maybe it's wild fish, wild salmon. They pick something, but then everything within that meal
Right.
is cheap
Right. It's covered in canola oil or
or
like,
low grade salts or
yeah.
seasonings that have tons of sugar. Like yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They have to cut corners somewhere, right? So right away, that's one of the things you can do for your family is just not eat out as much. And I know that that could be challenging for most people because as you said, it's fun to eat out. We need a break, but it really is better for your wallet. It is cheaper to eat in. It's going to be better for everyone's health, and you can kind of turn it into, I don't know, like we're what we're doing in my family is we're really like leaning into you got to earn these things. Like they don't just arrive. Like when I was growing up, every Friday we went to go get pizza. Every Friday was pizza, and pretty much almost every Sunday was Chinese food.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like it didn't matter what happened that whole week. That's what we did. And it was like kind of wild now that I think about it, because I don't even like we were kind of starting to do not pizza, but we were kind of doing that thing where we were eating out every Friday, and I really did not feel good. Like I think once you get space, once you start to feel healthier, then doing things that are unhealthy really stand out, like they're really prominent. But all of this leads to that one question you started with, which was, what is the lingual neural response? And that's kind of my kind of focus on Bill Schindler's quote of like, well, if we are so out of touch with our bodies, how do we actually get back in touch with this kind of ancestral knowledge of what we should be eating? Because we had it, we did know, but we don't anymore. And so how do we get back to that? And what it is that basically we have these biological processes that have developed for hundreds of thousands of years, right? It's because we're in the same body, basically, Homo sapien, right? That was around, I think, 300,000 plus years ago, something like that. So we're in basically the same body for that long, right? So these biological processes have been developing since then. And they're things like how our senses communicate with our body in terms of what our body needs and what our body wants. And so if you think about it from that ancestral standpoint, you might think of it like, okay, you're walking through the forest, you hear something drop. So first it starts with your hearing. You turn, you see then this tree, and it's got these what look like these round, plump things on them. And you're like, what's that? So now you're using your eyes and you start walking towards it. And as you get closer, you start to smell things in the air that weren't there before. So now your smell is also communicating to your body, like, what is this? What that smell? It's intriguing, right? And then you get closer, you touch it, and it feels plump. So now your hands are getting involved. You're tactile with your food. You stick it closer to your nose, now even more smells are coming into your body, and everything about your body is saying, bite this, right? You're getting this communication. You then take a bite, the juices start to run down your mouth, and your taste buds start to erupt with this flavor of whatever it is you're eating. And the flavors deepen the more you chew it, the
Mhm.
mastication, right? And then you swallow it, and your body then tells you like a definitive, like more, or like I'm good, right? But there's this absolute process that started from just the hearing to the eyesight to the touch to the taste to the mouth feel of it to the mastication. And what's happening when your body is going through that lingual neural response is that it's telling you, I want more or less of this. And it will literally tell you when to stop if you eat slow enough, right?
Mm.
So both of those things have to happen. You have to be eating slow enough, and you have to actually be eating it, chewing it. And
Yeah.
so what now you move to what is happening in modern society? Well, most of us are eating standing up. We're scarfing our food down. We're taking more and more supplement pills. So we're not even actually eating something, we're swallowing something, which is a delayed response. When you swallow something, like let's just say salt, for example, if I put salt on your tongue, your body has a response to that salt that goes on your tongue. And it normally will say, "Ooh, that tasted good the first time." But by the third time, the taste of the salt changes, and your body's like, "No, stop, stop." And it literally will not let you do it again because it will start to gag, right? Well, if I swallow a salt tablet, I get no response. Maybe 20, 30 minutes later, wait, why am I feeling so bloated? Oh, I got too much, right? So one is complete guesswork, and the other is working with your body. This actually happens physically as well. If you ever try to lift something that's too heavy for your body, your grip will give out. And it's your body's way of protecting itself. So that grip strength they talk about, like particularly nowadays, they're like, oh, the grip strength will determine how healthy you are as you get older. Well, there's truth to it. Like your grip strength represents what your body can handle, right? And it's the same thing happening when we eat our food. So the best thing we can start doing, like if I were to break down like a new pyramid, like is first of all like simplify, right? Is to totally like take like the top of that pyramid, I would have just have it be flavors that you find in nature. So that means not eating tons of ultra processed foods that have ultra like artificial flavors or even natural flavors, because natural flavors are questionable as well.
Yeah.
So, so really trying to move to things that aren't enhanced with different flavors, but just are flavors you find in nature. So that means you're looking for things that are ingredients versus have ingredients. And then in the bulk of that, so that's just the very tip of the pyramid. Then in the bulk, middle of that pyramid, now you're just looking for nutrient dense foods, which is what you already said. We're just looking for foods that are single ingredient foods that I'm making from scratch that still have their nutrients intact, that haven't been fortified, that haven't been ultra processed and broken down or isolated, but they're just real foods that everything's intact. And then at the very bottom of that, the grounding of that pyramid, I would say mindfully eat. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the one people forget,
Yeah.
is you have to mindfully eat. So everything that you're choosing to put in your family's cupboards, your family's refrigerator, and into your family's mouths, be mindful about it. And this is where I think as parents, and I am fully taking ownership that I do this too, so I don't want to pretend I'm better than anyone, I'm not, is that we thwart our own efforts. So we bring food into our kitchens that we actually don't want our kids to eat, but we do it because we want them to not feel deprived. We feel like we need to provide treats, or I don't even know what. Everyone makes their own excuses for it, and I do it too. But I bring food in that is literally things that I'm like, oh, why am I bringing these cookies or these chips or these snack things, these ultra processed snacks? Why am I doing that? And it's like a lot of reasons come up. Like one is sometimes I feel bad because my kids eat differently than everyone else. Um, Sometimes I feel like, well, I was rewarded when I was a kid growing up, and used to be taken out for ice cream whenever anything happened, bad or good. And I just sort of, it's almost ingrained in me that like you try to emotionally connect with your kids through food. And then maybe a third is just that I'm feeling lazy and I'm just like, we need snacks for school, and it's easier to already have something that's pre-made. So let me just buy this Snackwell thing or whatever it's called, or just this pre-made thing. But the reality is when I do that, I like totally, I get way too like what I happens like this past year, what I found happened is we were eating tons of like processed meat stuff, like chomps and things like that. Like you would think, oh, those are healthy, but they're still processed meats, right? And we were eating lots of like those gluten-free crackers,
Like simple meals.
Simple Mills. We're eating tons of those. We were eating tons of like like pretzely. We're gluten free, but they were gluten free pretzels, and then we were doing like wisp those
Oh,
Parmesan
mhm.
cracker things. But we were doing them like all the time, and I was like, this summer when the kids were at camp, I was like, we gotta snap out of this and get back to like whole real foods, like like hard boiled eggs, carrots, make making our own um you can make your own kind of like beef jerky really simply, and I can give the recipe in this talk. I mean, it's just so simple. You can do very simple things but keep it as real food, very low ingredient based stuff. We can even make our own um kind of gluten-free cheesy crackers, and then because the whole concept is if you're making it yourself, then you're not going to eat it all the time because it takes time to make it, right? So you're going to eat it
Mhm.
until it's gone and then you're out.
Yeah.
So you're
Mhm.
building in, this kind of control or this kind of um, only doing it every now and then.
Yeah. Well, I think a huge key to that is like the preparation. Like it's so much easier, obviously, to grab something that's like already been made. So you have to have the hard-boiled eggs made in the fridge. You have to have veggies washed and cut up and ready to go. You have to have, these things. We I was just talking to a friend, and then like my sister was just in town and she's really healthy, and my husband, and we were all just like, we want to get on this whole like not buying anything packaged thing, because it is so convenient. But even if there are, I mean, thankfully there are healthier options, but again, it still isn't necessarily like the healthiest. So,
It's like
you
an
know,
illusion. It's an illusion of health.
right, right. And for some people, it might be a huge change. Like for some people, switching from Doritos and Teddy Grahams to the Simple Meals crackers is a huge change. And they're eliminating a lot of things there. But like it's hard, like once your kids get used to some stuff, like
Totally.
in this spring, we were in swimming, and swimming, we had it every single day for 6 weeks, and it's a half hour away from the house. But it took up like a good hour and a half, 2 hours of our day by the time we packed up to get there, by the time we got home. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to buy some special snacks, because trying to get your 2-year-old to swim um, is tough. So I'm like, okay, I just need convenience right now. But then that like led to more stuff. So now I'm like, okay, we need to get back to just the packaged stuff, and or not, I mean, just Whole
Yeah,
Foods and
unpackaged. Yeah.
right. Because it can like be it is, it's the convenience, and there might be a time for convenience. I totally get that. But the every single day, when you're falling into it every single day. And then the other thing that I struggle with is like I don't want to like demonize certain foods and make that like, so foods weren't demonized for me growing up, but we didn't have money. So like we didn't buy like Gushers and Fruit by the Foot and all these other foods, but I would go to my friend's house and just eat a ton of it because we didn't have it. So I'm like, how do I like teach my kids like about this, to where it's like, no, we don't eat these foods, and then they're somewhere else and it's like demonized, then they just want it and they focus on it. Like um I remember interviewing somebody a long time ago about like food, and how like she's she doesn't say like, if you eat everything on your plate, then you get dessert. Like we're not prioritizing dessert. And we've actually done that with my kids. There's times where like I did just put like a little cookie on their plate with dinner. Like it's, and then they end up actually eating their entire dinner instead of just asking about the cookie, like focusing on this thing. It's like, I don't want sugar to be the prize. Like if you do everything right, then you get sugar. If you, you know, do all these other things, then you win sugar. So trying to like figure out how to go about this in my home. But also like you said, like not wanting your kids to miss out on some things, which we definitely don't like. But I guess my philosophy with some of that is like when I make cookies at home, like I don't care as much because there's like 5 ingredients in them. But if you like buy cookies from the store, it's this, you can't even pronounce half of them. So it's, I'm like, I don't, if I make a cookie at home, I know it's in it. I'm not as like no or whatever. We try to have fun with it. Sure, yeah, you can have a cookie. But trying to avoid the things that like are pre-made, but also like trying to like teach my kids about being healthy, especially when everywhere else we go, everybody's eating things that we necessarily don't.
Yeah, it's a real like there is definitely not one size that fits all. There's not like a formula that anyone can provide that's going to work for every family. But to your point, I think that we only know what we know. And so we have to kind of meet ourselves where we are. And every person and family is at a different place, right? Like what we're doing right now, my family, I can share, and maybe if it resonates with someone, they can follow suit, but I can't guarantee it's going to work for you because it's taken us, many years to get to this place, and like,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that language is really key to your point, like that it's not like it's almost like mindset and language are two things that we need to think about when we are trying to be mindful of what we're eating. And what I mean by language and mindset is like if you are a parent and you're feeling like your kids are deprived or like, oh, we have to have this dessert, and then you're like you were saying, like you're setting up the dessert as the reward for doing something. Well, that's a made up story. Like you're making that up. And I know I do that because well, that's how I was raised. And like so I have this story and this mindset that that's how it's supposed to be. So we almost have to unravel from these stories. We're convincing ourselves that this is how being a parent and raising a child, this is how it has to look. Like we really have to unravel for that, and we have to really kind of look at it and be like, is that true? Like literally, I ask myself that question all the time. Like, is what I'm saying right now, is that really true? Or am I telling myself that to make this situation okay or to justify my own, you know, childhood or whatever, there's some psychology to it. And not that I want everyone to be like in the weeds with, overthinking things, but I think that we do come into being parents with these kind of stories, and they don't have to be what we think they are. We can unpack them and we can let them go. And so like I think it's a really cool thing to try. Like I welcome everyone to try what you just said earlier, which is like try a year of only eating what you make from scratch. Just do it even for a month. You know what I mean? Like, what is it going to hurt? And if you think, like, if you hear that and you're like, oh my gosh, no, I could never do that. Like, oh, that's interesting, right? So that's a reveal. That is sharing that, oh, you clearly have some investment wrapped into this idea that you can't do it or that it should be done a different way. And that's what I'm saying. That's story. That's something that you're investing in. It's a mindset that's inaccurate. It's
Mm-hmm.
just something you're telling yourself is okay, but it doesn't have to be. And we can change, and we can really set our minds to doing things that we never thought we could do. But we just have to first we have to identify, well, is there a problem? Like, are my kids unhealthy, or is the culture of my family not feeling positive and conducive towards everyone's well-being and thriving. Like we have to first kind of evaluate, is what we're doing working or is it not? And then meet yourself there and then build from there. Not, oh, I'm comparing myself to, John Smith and they seem so amazing. Because I guarantee no one out there, even on social media, is like no one is how they're presenting themselves. No one.
Right,
No
right.
one's life is perfect. No one has got it all figured out. Everyone has got something that they're dealing with. They just may not be talking about it. I can't even tell you like the amount of people. I've been in the health field now for over 20 years. The amount of practitioners that I know, health practitioners, I'm talking big names, who are helping tons of people, thousands of people, but they're actually not taking care of themselves. The amount of people that is true is amazing. Like it's the first person to not take care of themselves is the health practitioner. Yet they're the ones dispensing all the health information, trying to get you to take care of yourself. And I'm not trying to condemn them. I'm more just saying that is human nature. It's like the inconsistency is human nature. So we have to meet ourselves first there. We have to take ownership of that. Okay, it's not going to be consistent. And let's just try something different and let's see. And maybe it's like, maybe doing a month of making everything from scratch is too much. So maybe pick one thing. Like, okay, if we have any desserts during this month, they will all be made from scratch. And I
Mhm.
guarantee you're not going to eat as many desserts. It's just no one has that, the only person that has that amount of time is the person that's, well, I don't even know because I was going to say someone that's working from home, but if you're working from home, you're so busy too, right? I mean,
Mhm.
taking like working from home, like being a homemaker is hard work. So if you're someone who has time to like make tons of desserts all day, then I would question, well, what else are you doing?
Oh yeah, well, nothing because so I didn't make a ton of desserts, but I got this last year like on a huge sourdough kick. I haven't made it in a while now. And then I started making like I made homemade graham crackers. I made homemade because I've never bought goldfish for my kids, so I decided to make sourdough goldfish. I made homemade marshmallows. I did like all of this stuff, and my husband and I would just laugh because I'd be like, I don't understand how like I don't get anything done. Then he's like, How many loaves of bread did you make today?
But how
Because
did
I
that
was
work?
like,
How did that work for your family though? Did you guys eat it all at once or were
Oh
you able to kind
no.
of like slowly partition it
Yeah.
out?
Yeah. Well, we don't eat a ton of bread in general. So I would batch like loaves and I'd freeze them. And then, like, when my friends would have a baby or a doula client, I'd bring them a loaf. And then I kind of like would do it in batches. But I stopped buying like sandwich bread and I'd make that. And it would last us a long time. Just because in general, my husband and I don't really eat that much bread. It'd be like, I'd cut toast into a star for my daughter or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, in like the graham crackers, I actually found that the food that I made started getting stale before we finished it. So
Yeah.
I either would need to like freeze or refrigerate it. But it was tasty, like those simple meals, graham cracker triangles that people are like obsessed with, or diamonds. Like I felt like my graham crackers like tasted like that. Like they were so delicious. Um, and I was like, I'm gonna go back to like, I'm like, anything that I can make that we don't have to buy from the store, like I'm gonna do. But then that was like also all that I was doing. Um, but I also we haven't really, I haven't made bread in a while. And I also haven't bought bread like in a long time because we just don't eat it really. Like if it's not
It
here, we're
comes in
not gonna eat
waves,
it.
right? It all
Yeah.
comes in waves. Like it, and that's the thing is you can honor that wave, like if you're like, I'm going to just make tons of bread. But I think one of the things you just outlined is a real trick. Like it's a real health trick, which is anything that you're making, just keep in the freezer. And I guarantee you won't use as much of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So so make sure it's partitioned out. Like if it's a loaf of bread, cut it into slices, right? So it's easy to just pull out when it's frozen. You don't have to defrost the whole thing. Same with the crackers. Make sure that they're already, um, you know, cut into the little crackers and then they're frozen like that. But I guarantee, well, they'll last longer, but B, you just won't eat as many because it's not in your face all the time. It's in a
Hmm.
freezer. There's a little bit of a kind of process that has to happen for you to eat it. It's like that's the kind of stuff I try to set up is I try to make it not like a game, but more just so that I have to really want it. I
Yeah.
think sometimes if we make things too easy, then we're supporting that picky eating in ourselves or in our kids. Like one thing that I see families doing sometimes, and this is one of the first things I try to nip in the bud, which is if I see a family making multiple meals,
Mm.
it's like now it's one thing if your kids are like you have a 6 to 2 year old and then everyone else is eating steak and peas, but even in that situation you could still cut up the steak so that they can gnaw on it and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you can adjust things to do like baby led weaning
Yeah.
eating, that kind of stuff. So you can still in that sense cook the same meal, you're just having to cut it up maybe a little different for people.
Yeah.
But this idea of making multiple meals, it absolutely supports picky eating. Like hands down. I've never met a parent who does that who doesn't have a picky eater. Never.
Hmm. Right.
Like,
Well,
have
I mean,
you?
no, I mean, my 8-month-old eats steak, so he
Yeah.
loves it. And my 2-year-old now, it's insane. Whenever we have steak, she eats an entire steak herself. She is my little carnivore kid. I made homemade wings the other night, there's nothing left on these wings. She is gnaws like she is my carnivore kid. She devours meat. Like my husband had um, for his birthday, I got him these like tomahawks, and I made one. She was like gnawing on the bone. She looked like a little cave woman. Like this girl wants nothing left. She eats cartilage, she eats skin, she eats everything.
And she's probably
Um,
better for it. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah. Well, what's crazy though is just like, you know, I was talking to somebody recently because all her and my other daughter are probably both going to need expanders at a young age. And like we did tie releases. I breastfed for 2 years. We did baby led weaning. I have pictures of all my kids at 6, 7 months gnawing on chicken legs, like on the bone. Like I feel like I did everything I could to support a developed jaw and a wide palate, and we still need help, you know? So there's also
Yeah.
times where you're like, I feel like I did everything and we still need some intervention. And I know some of that's just genetic and how our jaws aren't formed the way that they were because we're not eating how we were supposed to, but it can just feel like a lot sometimes.
But doesn't
But
that show you too, like the disadvantage that most people have? Like, because here you are, you're in, you talk to health practitioners, you're in the health space, you're aware of this stuff. Like most people aren't even aware of the
yeah.
options and the differences. And yet you're still like you even are recognizing like, yeah, we did everything right and we still have issues. It's like, well, think about, I mean, when I drove across the US just last summer because I was moving from the West Coast to the East Coast, and I saw like a lot of the US, now very specific parts of the US, because I obviously didn't drive through every state, but I drove through the upper states as I went from like Oregon to Massachusetts. And I went into town sometimes where the grocery store looked like a 7-Eleven, like
Mm-hmm.
our convenience store. It's like they did not have the options that we have, in Venice, California, or like, in any part of California. Um, they were like it was like a food desert, and
Yeah.
particularly a fresh food desert. So everything we're talking about, that this is how I would eat is single ingredient, foods. Like I don't even know if everyone has access to single ingredient foods. And you would think they would, but I'm talking like, oh, what? So they're going to eat apples all the time and bananas because that's all that most convenience stores have that are single ingredient.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a major problem going on, but it really does kind of start and stop with, well, what do you know? Like, where are you at right now? Like, what is the knowledge you have of what you think a healthy is? And then B would be like, well, do you even recognize that there's an issue? Because if you don't think there's an issue, then there's no issue. Like,
Right,
who's
right.
who's going to tell you differently? But if
Mhm.
you feel like there's an issue, then my where I would put my money is, okay, start with what are you eating and how are you living? How are you sleeping? What's your environment? And then how are you eating? But I would start there because those are the things that we do on a daily. And in
Mhm.
fact, when I think about healthy things, I try to think about what are the things that we do daily. Because if I can turn that health thing into a daily habit, then I don't have to think about it anymore, if that makes sense. Like you don't normally think about, oh, I need to brush my teeth. You just brush your teeth because that's a daily habit. So
Mhm.
I'm always looking for food things or health things that I can do just in small doses, because those are the things that we do daily are small dose things. To your point earlier, like you don't do extreme things daily because you'll burn out.
Mhm.
You do small things. And so I'm always looking for the small, healthy things I can do. So for some people, it might be making, just drinking more water. Every time I have a cup of juice or coffee, I'm going to drink 2 cups of water. You just you kind of set these um, habits that will build in the health change you want to see. But that's
Mhm.
the key is you got to get clear on what is the outcome I want to see.
Right, right. I know like when I started aiming for like 30 to 40 grams of protein at breakfast, it was hard to figure it out. And now like I just know what my options are. I know like my few staple breakfast things. And so it's like I don't even really think about it in the morning. I'm usually not like, what am I going to have for breakfast? It's like, okay, am I going to have eggs and sausage or am I going to have like leftover pot roast? Like
Totally.
it's like
That's
what
so
are my two
smart. When
things?
I was becoming a chef, this is a trick actually that anyone can do is so um I was cooking for the Vans Warp Tour this one summer. And I did that specifically because I wanted to get better as a chef. I knew that being put in a stressful environment was going to make me a better chef. It was going to make force me to be faster and force me to really think on my feet better as a chef. And you can't read that in a book. You can't just will it. You have to be put in a stressful situation to become it. And so one thing I quickly learned is like, okay, I had to feed 250 people that day. And if I filled the pan, the big metal pans they have in the kitchens, if I fill that pan, so high and all the way to the top or a little bit over, I knew it was like, okay, that feeds 250. So it became a visual thing, not something I had to like actually count. I didn't have to measure things daily. You just visually start to do it. And that's one of the things you could start doing in your own home kitchen is, let's just say you're trying to hit a certain amount of protein. Okay, I know that if I eat these five protein rich foods, and if I do this amount and just visualize it instead of like weighing everything constantly, just weigh it once, get the visual in your head, and then now just meet that visual every time. And you're going to be pretty darn close to what you need.
Yeah, yeah. I want to go back to the food deserts thing really quick because it is so insane that how it is like very privileged to be able to eat healthy depending on like where you live. Um, but also like we've gotten so far away. It kind of goes back to that, the lingual neural response too. Like we don't work for any food either. So we just buy everything. Um, and one thing we're trying to do is like grow more of our stuff, but um, it's we are so disconnected from our food, so disconnected. Um, like I know somebody on social media who grows their own meat and they were showing a slaughtering process and people were like so upset and they're like, you let your kids see that, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, yeah, like if your kid eats a burger, they should know where it comes from. Like this burger just doesn't magically appear. A cow gave their life for that burger. And so this just connection with our food, not only where it came from, but even the taste, right? Like when we switched over to grass fed, grass finished steak, it tasted different. And it took a while for us to like get used to, but now we've been eating that for a couple of years. And I got steaks somewhere else randomly and those tasted weird to me now. I'm like, this tastes weird. Like this doesn't taste like the steak, but we're like when you actually let your senses engage with your food, um, there's like some research that shows that like you get satisfied quicker. Like when you are tasting that apple, you're feeling the crunch of the bite, you're feeling the juices in your mouth, you're chewing it and connected with it, you're less likely and it like to eat a ton, I guess. But it makes sense because like if you're sitting on the couch watching a TV show and snacking, you're going to eat a bunch more if you're eating popcorn out of a bag versus like if you pour a little bit in a bag and you're just like enjoying that and then moving on. Like there's just like such a huge disconnect with everything when it comes to our food, how it shows up at our house and everything. So um, that's just something that even like if you one small change that like you can make is just trying to be more connected to whatever
Yeah.
you're eating.
And then the
And
question becomes, well, how do you connect? And I think you're already throwing out some really great things. It's like, because the reality is that we have to create the connection. We cannot look to our government. We cannot look to the industry to do it for us. And I think a lot of us do. I think a lot of us are like, well, if it's sold in a grocery store, that must mean it's good for me. It's like, nope,
mhm.
that has nothing to do with that. It's just what they think you'll buy. It's someone trying to make money off of you. And that is the reality that most companies are not in it for our health. And the government is definitely co-opted. Like they have industry that is influencing what they tell us we should eat. So you really can't trust that. You have to go, in my judgment, inward first. So I wouldn't even look to your friends. Like first go inward and start being more mindful. And how for me it starts. So then it's like, okay, well, what tools can I incorporate? Well, for me, I don't bring anything into the kitchen I don't want my family to eat. And I'm even getting stricter with that. But I don't have to then use the language of like, well, we're strict in this household. It's just like, no, no, this is how we eat. Just change your language. This is how we eat. And when you're on your own, like the reality is the kids are going to eat however they're going to eat when they're not in our presence. And we have no control over that. Once they start school, usually in kindergarten, that's when it starts. They start getting exposed to other things. We don't have control over that. But what we can do is not focus on the fact that we don't have control around that, but focus on what we do have control over, which is our own household. And when you can have that as the reset, so no matter what your kids eat outside of your house, don't fret about it. It's whatever it is. Yes, you try to support them. Like they come home and like they say, "Oh, I ate this." And you're like, "Well, how does that feel in your body?" You like use language to support them to be more, like aware of how their body feels when they eat this stuff. And then your home is always your base, like your reset button. It's like, well, yeah, like my daughter was just at camp. This happened last year as well. And she always comes back and her face looks a little oilier. It looks a little like kind of more pimply and things like that. Like her face breaks out. And last summer when it happened, she was like so aware of it. And I said, well, let's see what happens when you just eat our food for a couple of weeks. Let's see if your skin clears up. And it totally did. And so she was like,
Mhm.
like I didn't shame her. I didn't be like, oh, well, it's because you ate horribly this summer. It's like, no, I'm like, okay, well, let's just see what happens now. And it totally cleared up. And I'm like, isn't that interesting how when you change what you eat, your body reacts so quickly? And so then this summer, she kept saying, I can't wait to come home to have, a home cooked meal. And she even recognized, hey, did you see my skin looks better? I made better decisions this summer. And I'm like, yeah, well, let's see what happens, when you start eating from home again. And it totally cleared up again. So it's like just trying to mirror back to our kids, this is your body, and this is what happens when you do this, 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 this. This is the outcome you see. So let's try to find a different outcome if that's not the outcome you want. But letting them kind of be a part of the experiment versus the shame of like, well, you chose wrong. It's like,
Mhm.
well, they're going to be facing it one day or another anyway. Like you can't escape modern life. And if you do, then please inform me how to do it because I don't know how. But like, and still be a part of society, right? It's like, yes, you can go off grid, but then you're not a part of society. So I don't bring anything into the house that I don't want them to eat now. And like I said, I've gotten really even clear about what that is. And then we also are eating out less. We used to eat out once a week, and now we're doing it once a month as well. And or if the situation calls for it. But we're really trying to like set our weeks up for success. Well, and that's something also that we do is a lot of people may be entrepreneurs, they may be in working, in corporate world or whatever, or just have a business, right? And so they look at like their business life as one thing, and then they look at their home life as something totally different. But some really smart people actually like showed me like actually you can take your household and treat it like a business. And that doesn't mean that it has to be cold, but you can set just like there's things in your business you do for success, you can do the same things in your household. So like you can together as a household set like household rules. We like have a chore board and the kids love it. Like we just implemented it like a few weeks, yeah, about 3 weeks ago when the kids got home from camp and they freaking love it. They like, who knew that them being able to check a box off that they did a chore would excite them so much, but it does. They totally love it. And they bought into this whole new thing we've set up where it's like, okay, when you have done all these things, that's how you earn screen time. So that's the other thing is we've pulled back screen time severely. Like it used to be like every Friday they get their iPad or something. Now we don't even do that. And
Mhm.
it's now creating a different child, like all these kind of modern conveniences. And because we have to remember like what's informing our kids of these kind of diet, these foods, right? It's commercials and things like that they're getting from the screen. So A, if they're getting exposed to screens, that means they're getting exposed to all those products that you probably don't want them to eat. And then B, there's already tons of education out about like the more screen time a kid has, it changes their persona. Like it kind of makes them a bit of you know, a pill, right? It just makes them not as great of a person. And I've experienced it myself. Like they're just both kids if they get too much. So setting these kind of boundaries, household boundaries have been like game changing for us. And we always had some kind of boundary, but we've just gotten even more specific, but we've included the kids in it. And
Mhm.
here's really, really, I mean, I cannot stress this enough, is you can't just be a dictator. It has to also you have to be involved too. So like my wife and I have our chores and it's on the list, you know what I mean? And it's like we are participating too. So we're not doing the things that we're telling our kids they shouldn't do. And
Yeah.
then other things that you can do is you can include your kids in the process as much as possible. So like when we are planning meal planning for the week, we include the kids in it. When we go grocery shopping, we include the kids in it. When I start cooking, I include the kids in it. So the more that they can be a part of that process, that is getting them closer to their food sources. Yes, they're not slaughtering the animal, but they're at least seeing the steak before it's cooked, or they're seeing the whole chicken before it's, what it looks like with the giblet, the neck and the giblets, if that comes with that. They're getting to see more of it than just shredded meat.
Mhm. Yeah. I love that idea. I bought poster board to make a chart for my kids, but then we ended up painting on it. So I need to get a new one. But I like even so I have my kids, one thing that they usually do is when we wash all the fruits and vegetables, like I put them in like water and vinegar, but they like to get up on their stool and like pretend they like wash them. I'm like, okay, can you guys like wash them? And then when they're done, I'm like, okay, put it over here. And they like love helping out with that. But I think so much of this does come back to like convenience and then like parenting because packaged food is easier and convenient. Screens are easier and convenient. So putting up these boundaries is making your job as a parent harder, or just
At
more
first,
involved, right? At
at first,
first, until you see the differences in your kids, right?
yeah.
My
'Cause
4-year-old
I,
becomes a monster with a lot of screens. So
yeah,
they don't have
but
iPads,
I
but just even like too much TV, she's insane.
totally. Well, and I'll share this since we've done this. So yes, it's totally harder at first. And it's gonna feel like, oh, why am I doing this? Like you're adding to your workday. And I hear you. Like I don't want to add to my workday. I already work hard enough. But then something, and it happens very fast. It switches over. And suddenly it's like, oh, now that the kids aren't watching their screens, that means we actually have family time and we're playing more cards and we're playing more games together and there's actually more connection time. And so now there's a clearer line of like, hey, this is my work day and this is my family time. And it's actually like having that boundary is actually better for all of us because let's face it, as adults, we're like overindulging in the screens too. We're like on our phones all the time. Like it's affecting our behavior too. We are
Yeah.
disconnected too.
Yeah.
Like we cannot pretend we're different than our kids. We're the same. We're all
Mhm.
human and we're all facing the same new issues. Like these are new issues, this screen time stuff, right? Because while you and I have been alive, like I remember I mean, I know I'm older than you, but I remember pre iPhones. Like I
Yeah.
remember what things were like before computers. I was
Hmm.
born in 73. So
Hmm.
that stuff did not exist. You know what I mean? So it's like for those of us that have that difference, like, like this is new for us too. And so we have to kind of just take ownership of the fact like, yeah, it is going to feel hard at first, but I promise you the boundary, whether it's around feeding, whether it's around, what you're willing to make or not make, whether it's around the household and how you run the household, like the boundary will be more successful than not having the boundary. That I can guarantee.
Hmm. Right. Right. Well, and I feel like you're teaching them a skill that a lot of these kids growing up are not going to have, and that's to be a functional member of society. Um, People skills are going to be like a lost art in the upcoming generations because kids don't interact with each other. Like teens aren't interacting with each other, they're interacting with their phones. Like you can get anything like virtually. You don't have to build connection. You don't have to, like, you can order anything and it's at your house the next day. Like, you don't have to, there's just so many things that were completely different when we were growing up. And so, having responsibility, knowing how to interact with people, which you do by not having a screen, like when you're at the grocery store. Um, a lot of times when I'm grocery shopping, I see other kids in the cart with like holding a phone or an iPad in front of their face. And we've never once given our kids a screen, like at a grocery store or even when we've gone out to eat ever. We just never even thought about it because, well, they don't have iPads and I'm not going to give them my phone. So they have to interact with other people in the store. They have to help me grocery shop. They're looking around, they're picking things out or being like, can we get this? Can we do that? They have to interact with the waitress at a restaurant. Um, and even interacting with their food. You can't eat with just a screen in front of your face. Like that's the ultimate like disconnection. Um, so
Totally.
you're
Well, and we
you're
forget about white space too, right? Like just the need for not to always have stimulation.
yeah.
Like the importance of that. It's so easy to forget that and this is what I'm talking about. We have to challenge ourselves. We cannot just kind of coast because if we coast, so if what it looks like when we coast is like, okay, I'm going to go for a run, honey, and then you put your, podcast on. So we're doing it too. Or I'm going to go to the gym, work out, put my earphones on, start listening to music or a podcast. It's like we're doing the same thing. We're not stopping. We're not allowing for silence and just not no stimulation. So we have to start with ourselves. Like we can't expect it of our kids if we're not doing it. But like I
Mm-hmm.
said earlier, you have to recognize that it's an issue before you can even take a step,
Mm-hmm.
a different step. So it all starts with mindset and language in my judgment. Like you have to see that it's an issue. And if it is an issue, then now it's time to make the change and you have to walk your own talk because the kids, let's face it, kids are sponges. They pick up everything. They listen to our words. We think they're not listening. They hear the words, how we talk. I was just in a really fascinating conversation actually with um my stepmom and we were talking about the indirect uh like learnings that kids get in a household that we don't attend. And we were talking about how one of my daughters, my youngest daughters, was started just one day saying like, "Oh, I'm shy," and I was like, "What?" Like you're not shy. Like she just started labeling herself something. And I was like, where are you getting that? Like in my definition of shy, you are not that. And I started to notice sometimes when she is around like certain grandparents or something like that, or just certain people, like sometimes they would make an offhanded comment of like, oh, you're feeling shy right now. Or, oh, it's okay to be shy. Like they were labeling her that. And it was like, but she's not being shy. She's just being a 6-year-old kid who's like hesitant to immediately enter the room being loud. Like she's just kind of feeling the room before she fully shows up.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
but that stuff happens all the time. And we're doing it around food, we're doing it around lifestyle, we're doing it around behavior. So we have to first recognize that and be more mindful of how we even show up. It's got to
Yeah.
start with us, though.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, this is a good conversation for me because I'm definitely like super guilty of it. And a couple years ago, my husband and I did a challenge to each other, where just by 7 p.m. we put our phones down for the night and we didn't touch them the rest of the night. And we would maybe sometimes like watch a show together or a movie, but oftentimes not.
How
And
did that go?
it was amazing. We did it for a whole month. And I remember at that point in my life, I was like, I don't have time to read. I don't have time to do this thing. And then I was like, oh, I do have time for those things. Like, I just wasn't making time. And I've gotten so bad at being on my phone. And even like to the point where at night, like, I like to watch a show that is mindless because I feel like as a mom, you're so overwhelmed. You hear your name 1,000 times a day. You're getting, it's just crazy all the time, the season that I'm in. And it's like, I just don't want to think. And so I can just put on like a show that I don't have to think about and I'll do it like while I'm showering and getting ready for bed. And but I know it's weird because like I have this like deeper feeling of being like, just turn it off. Like I tell myself that almost every single night. I'm like, just don't watch that show. And then I go to do it. It's like you need silence. Like, but also if I'm on a screen all the time and I can't be in silence with myself, how can I expect my children to be? So it is like such, our kids are totally our mirrors and it's monkey see, monkey do. And we teach them things like if I'm on my phone all the time, if I'm listening to a podcast every time I'm cooking and doing stuff, well, no wonder my kid wants to watch TV or do something all the time too, because I'm having some sort of input all day and they want some sort of input all day. And so I feel like it's like what you're saying is so true. And I'm like, man, I
Are
need to set
you
these boundaries up.
are you more tactile, auditory, like where sounds, or visual?
Um,
And we usually have a bit of all three, but what's strongest for you? Like
yeah.
in terms of how you learn or how you listen, like do you listen best through touch, audio, or visual?
Um, I'm not sure. I feel like so when it comes to like learning, I'm very much like I need to be in a classroom type of person versus like just an online type thing. Like I like to physically like be somewhere. But I don't know. I feel like audio, no, I usually need the visual. I do love listening to music. I love listening to podcasts, but like if I'm gonna like learn something, I don't know. I guess I learn a lot through podcasts. That's a hard question. I don't
Well,
know.
because it's kind of the gateway to understanding how to, like, it's one of the ways to reconnect. It's
Hmm.
so let's just say if you're someone who learns through touch,
Hmm.
which I am, that's my dominant. Um, then for me to not check out and to engage with, let's say, my partner, or just to engage in something that's going to fill me, then I need to be incorporating touch. So maybe it might be instead of turning on the iPad, like my wife and I can just sit in bed and I can just kind of stroke her arm, or she can stroke mine,
Hmm.
and it's like it doesn't have to be sexual, but it can just be a touch. And just through that touch, it's going to immediately make me feel grounded and engaged. And so I will not only be more present, So it's like that kind of lingual neural response in terms of us learning what foods work for our bodies can also connect us to the moment, but it helps to know what's your most dominant. So if you're touch, then even just like rubbing your fingers together while you're in a lecture, for example, is going to help you listen better because you're getting a tactile kind of response going. So that's something that you can do with your partner as well, your kids. If it's audio, you can close your eyes, and just quiet yourself for a second and listen to what sounds do I hear in the room. You know what I mean? And so,
Hmm.
and then whatever it is, if it's visual, then you can even you can kind of like just start scanning the room and kind of looking at what do you see, you know? But just to kind of like, I think that's one thing that we forget is that we want to, of course, feel engaged with the food, mindful about the foods we're eating, but we also need to be kind of mindful about where are we when we do anything. Like
Hmm.
where is my body right now? Like, yes, I'm sitting in this chair, but am I really here? Am I really present? Am I really talking to you? And it's like, so what can I do to engage? And it really can be as simple as sometimes just rubbing your fingers together to feel touch. It could be like taking a deep breath so you feel your the heaving of your chest, and that's one of the tricks even when you're trying to be more mindfully eating is to just do like either a prayer or a breath or a grace before you actually start to eat anything.
Hmm. Yeah.
And maybe in that breath or that grace, you're stating what your intention is, what you want, what outcome you want from that food. I want to feel nourished. I want to feel more energetic than I do now. And I don't want to overeat. I want to eat just enough that will get me to my next, meal.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And just set that intention. And for some people, they might hear this and go like, "Oh, I don't want to take that time." But it's like that, but taking that time will give you back more. Like it's the
Hmm.
same thing like we were just talking about, like just a little bit of white space will give you more on the other end of it. Setting boundaries in your family will give you more on the end of it. So it's like, but we can't go there unless we let ourselves. And for us to let ourselves do it, we have to be willing just to try something different. Um, but it's amazing just that like the other question I would probably ask you is what's your love language? Have you ever read that book?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
what's your love language?
Um, I would say, because I know that it's changed a lot, I love quality time.
Yeah.
Quality time is definitely a big one for me, and probably acts of service.
So if you think about it, as you figure out how you bet if you're tactile, audio, or visual, and then knowing that quality time is a love language for you, like that's your in towards not being on screens
Right.
because you are going to feel more filled by the end of the day if you are in your love language and in your kind of like presence than if you're checked out and just like sitting there the whole time, like half falling asleep, kind of half going like, why am I watching this? Why am I watching? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's not going to fill you. That's just kind of like, that's almost like the way we deal with screens is similar to how we deal with certain foods, like addictive foods. If you think about it, when someone does drugs, yes, they're chasing a high, but they're ultimately trying to like separate from their current life. Like they're trying to just kind of shut off
Yeah.
their normal life and just kind of like escape, right? The same thing we're doing with when we're watching screens at the end of the day. Same thing we're doing when we're drinking alcohol. We're just trying to like decompress, like separate ourselves from our day. But what would happen if instead of separating ourselves from our literally ourselves and our day, we actually got engaged, but we engaged ourselves through our love language and through the thing that stimulates us versus like because throughout our day we've been active and stuff, but we haven't been active in the way that fills us necessarily unless you're doing the work that you love, right? But
Hmm.
most people are not. Most people are just doing the work that gets them their bills paid. And then they try to fill themselves on the weekends. It's like, what if you ended each day with something that's filling you versus just kind of like separating you? Like, just think
Mhm.
about what, like, that could be really interesting. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and that's like when we decided to put our phones down at 7 o'clock, like that's what it did. Like, even if we were
Yeah.
doing two different things, then we were like on the couch together and he'd be reading a book and I'm doing a Sudoku and but our feet are touching or you know what I mean? Like you're just even just hanging out or even we just had like a lot more conversations. We started playing like we both love to play rummy. So we were playing that and talking and we're both huge on like communication and conversation and stuff like that. So it did create space for like more of that and then you are just like naturally more in tune like with your partner with your kids. Yeah, I know that I need to do it. It's just there's really no excuse. It's the
Well, and so
overwhelm
that
and the
could be a language,
stress,
but that
you
could be a
know.
language thing too, is like instead of seen as something you need to do, see it as something you want to do.
Right,
Like
true.
literally shift
Yeah,
shift the language. Because when we need to do it, it's another, as parents, it feels like, oh, yet another thing I have to do.
right. Like,
It's
and
like,
in reality, like I want to be present with my kids. I want to be present with my husband. I want to have time at the end of the night to read a good book, take a bath, just hang out with him or whatever it is versus just constantly being distracted. So,
and it is scary at first, like being alone with your thoughts and not being stimulated. I mean, it is, I don't want to pretend for the person that isn't doing it that it's going to be easy, but nothing's easy at first. I mean, nothing. Like
mhm.
when we were first learning to walk, that wasn't easy. We just did it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And we fell a lot, and just we watch our kids do that. It's like we have to give ourselves the grace of the process. But I think to the person that's out there going like, well, I don't know if that's going to work. It's like, well, try it because you don't know what you don't try. And you won't know a difference until you get some space from your regular thing. And I know we wanted to talk about, if you don't mind me jump into this, because it kind of ties into the whole family thing, but I know we wanted to talk about picky eating. Do you mind
Mhm.
if we just
Yeah,
jump
of
right there?
course. Hmm.
Because one of the things that you can do to support a picky eater to be more adventurous is it's actually it's a little less complicated than people think, but like we have, so you come at it from a very practical standpoint. So we have, and it's tied to that lingual neural response. So we have four flavors that we've all learned about. So we've learned that we have the taste of salt, sweet, bitter, sour. And then there's a fifth one called umami, which is basically like savory. And they think there's a sixth one that it has to do with like foods that have gone bad. Like it's that kind of rancid smell. Because if
Hmm.
you've ever noticed, like that's a totally different smell and taste than anything else. So they think
Yeah.
that might be the sixth one. But so those if you think about those those senses of taste, think about what is the standard American diet. Well, that's mostly salt and sweet, right? So if you have a picky eater, it's not just behavioral. It's not like, yes, you may have been supporting it by making, meals, multiple meals and like cutting chicken into dino shapes, then, instead of just giving them what everyone else is eating, like you may have supported it, but it actually may be more structural than you think. They might just be very kind of addicted to the salty and sweet. And so the way that you start to get a kid to be more adventurous is you got to start to incorporate the flavors they're not getting. And you don't have to do it all at once. You just do a little bit, almost the way you would do if you were changing a pet food, like a dog's food. You would give them 95% of the old food and only 5% of the new food. And then over time, eventually you would get to 95 or 100% of the new food and 5% or nothing of the old food, right? But you gradually do it so that it doesn't negatively affect their digestion. Well, the same thing with a kid. So, how that might look is, let's just say they're used to more salty, sweet things. Well, you can buy something called like fermented pickles, like Bubby's is a brand that does it. You can buy cultured vegetables, and that juice in those is more sour, sometimes bitter, but it's more sour. And then what you could do is add a little bit of that juice to their food. And not so much where they're like, ew, what's this? But you just introduce some of those flavors. You don't actually have to give them the pickle, just to get a little bit of this sour juice, right, from the kraut or from the pickle. And it will literally start to, and just keep doing a little bit every day for 2 weeks, and their palate will start to shift. And you can start to increase it a little bit to, let's say, 1 week, keep it at one level, and then the next week, increase it a little bit, and you keep going. You can also do things like anything that has umami in it, like PLUCL has umami. We get told all the time that when people use the organ meat seasoning, that their kids don't know it, but then that umami in the seasoning is starting to open their palate up and they become more adventurous. You can do trying to think what else. You could actually do some vegetable juices as well, where you're, like I said, you're not giving them a juice drink. You're just putting some of the juice in their food. And just make sure it's a juice that is either bitter, sour, or that umami. And
Mhm.
you'll see their palate will start to shift. We used to do these things back in the day called sugar control detoxes. And it was a 2 week program where we would pull out anything that was sweet. So no desserts, no sugars. We would pull out anything that converted into sugar quickly in the blood. So like pastas, starches, grains, we put all that stuff out. We basically gave them a low carb diet, high protein, low carb diet. And and then the only fruit they were allowed was berries. So they were allowed not even strawberries, but they were only allowed raspberries, blueberries, and blackberries. And then they were allowed sweet potatoes, resistant starches, but nothing, no actual potato starches or anything like that. No complex, no, like I said, no grains of any kind. And then really just animal protein, fat, and vegetables, and then those little bit of fruit, right? And in 2 weeks, oh, and no alcohol as well. And in 2 weeks, everyone's palate changed just by pulling that stuff out.
Mhm.
Everyone's, like, to the point where they tasted, when they did first have their first strawberry, it's like it tasted so sweet to them. When they had that first glass of wine, it was so sweet, and they could only drink half of it. So they went
Mhm.
from doing 3 glasses a night to only half a glass. And then if you keep bringing those foods back in, then you start to desensitize your palate, and your palate gets used to those same flavors. And then it's like you're right back where you started. But it is an example of, like, you just need to pull out certain flavors, bring certain flavors in, and you can make a kid more adventurous and move them away from being so picky.
Yeah, yeah. I might try that 2 week detox with my family. I got to plan it around some birthday parties that we have coming up, but I feel like my girls, especially, they could live on steak, salmon, blueberries, and carrots. So if we could do that for a couple of weeks, they
Well,
can
that's the
make
thing.
it
We all
through.
get locked in, right? I mean, we always just get locked into these specific diets, but the more of, like, hitting all those different, I look at food as notes, like music notes. And so it's like the more you can hit the different note of salt, sweet, sour, bitter, umami, like just trying to mix them in, mix them up. And if you notice you're always in the salt category, which most people are, you're always in the sweet category, which most people are, then you got to start changing that, because that is the culprit. That's the issue. It's
Hmm.
not it's not just that they're behaviorally picky, it's that their palate is picky.
Yeah. What are, I guess, maybe some other, not just like juices, but like if you're saying like most people in general are salt or sweet, what are like bitter and sour examples?
Well, bitter is definitely in some winter greens. Like, you see that show up a lot, like kales are bitter, arugula is bitter. And I know that stuff might be harder to incorporate, but spinach is technically bitter as well. You could also, there are bitters, that there's already some, like, tinctures that have just herbs
Yeah.
that are bitter. So you could just buy some of those, because they're very tame normally. They're just bitter, and just use a drop in their food. But like, what I'll do sometimes is I mostly was, I just try to incorporate all those different flavors into things. So when, and if you eat seasonally, then you are going to get those naturally in your diet. Like, because if you're only, let's say, going to farmers markets and their farmers markets are truly seasonal, they're not just like a lot of people don't know this, but some of the farmers, they're just buying stuff from like big grocery and then they're selling them at a farm stand. So you're like, why, how does this person have broccoli every day throughout the entire year? Like, how do they have oranges all year round? It's like, well, because they're buying them conventionally. Um, but if you're truly going to a farmer's market that's seasonal, they will naturally have foods that are fitting these different flavors. It's just part of our seasons. Like winter is more bitter and sour. It's just how the winter is.
Yeah. I
And
can't think
and
of it.
summer is sweet. Summer is
Yeah.
sweet, right?
Hmm.
It's just if you were really in season, like berries usually only grow during the summer. But
Right.
if you're buying them, in the grocery store, they're year round.
Right. Um, I can't think of this green now, and it's gonna drive me crazy. I never had it before I met my husband. It's more of like an Italian thing, and they saute it, and it's really, really bitter.
The frizzy, is that one?
No, I can't.
Or you're talking the radicchio.
That's not what they call it. They call it something else.
But
I
those are
can't.
all bitter. Those are bitter greens as
It's
well.
whatever it is. It's so bitter, and I love it. It
Yeah.
tastes like dirt and bitterness. I love things that taste like dirt, but it's so bitter, and I've never had it before. I met my husband. The Italians make it a lot. A lot of times she makes it
Yeah.
with like cannellini beans,
Yep.
mixes it together. It's gonna drive me crazy.
But that is an example. Like you go around the world, and if you go to any country like Spain, Italy, France, even like any place that's eating locally, and seasonally, it's built into their food. And you probably see less pickiness too. Like that's kind of what I always found this fascinating when I was in Denmark, um, Korea. I'm trying to think somewhere else. I mean, even France to a degree, but like there's certain countries you go to where the people really do seem healthier.
Yeah.
And if you look at what they eat in a day, like they're not eating like sweet pancakes and all this like sweet breakfast foods in the morning and throughout the day. Like I remember when I spent some time in Korea and we were teaching English and we were eating in a cafeteria with a mix of Korean educators and then American educators. And they served the Americans what they thought was American breakfast, and they served the Koreans what is Korean breakfast. And the Korean breakfast looked so much healthier. It was like actual greens. It was like not, if anything was savory, not sweet. It was like salads and seaweeds and wraps and like seaweed wraps and things like that. And it was like, and they wouldn't let us eat it too. It's just so funny. Throughout the time I kept going, can I try what they're having? And they're like, no, no, this is for you. And I was like, oh,
What?
and they were serving us what was like the typical breakfast. It was like pancakes with sweet syrup or waffles with sweet syrup or sausage with sweetness in it, sugar or maple syrup in it. And it was like, it was really eye-opening to me. It's like, most countries don't eat sweets for breakfast. They eat like savory food for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, and they might have a sweet treat at the end of the day. And if
Yeah.
they do, it's very small portions.
Hmm. Rapini, that's what it is.
Oh, rapini, yeah.
Um, my husband would argue against that though, because he always says that the Italian breakfast is like cookie and a coffee.
Yeah, that's
Um,
why it's I may have said Italy, but you're right. Italy is not the best. So it's Korea, Denmark for sure. And I've seen sometimes in France they eat a little less, but you're right. Italy is like, yeah, it's like a biscuit, right?
Yeah, I feel like a
Biscuit and
handful
coffee.
of like European countries are that way. But in general, though, the reason why these countries are so much healthier, though, is that they are walking everywhere, that they sit down and enjoy their meals. They take hours to enjoy food. typically less ingredients, less processed things. Like if you buy
A lot
pasta
of
in
homemade
Italy,
stuff. Yeah.
right, pasta in Italy has one ingredient. Pasta here has been fortified with a bunch of different things. I mean, you can buy it here with one ingredient, but typically, like in general, they're getting fresher ingredients, fresher things. Obviously, things that are banned there are not banned here. So
Totally.
it's just the culture around the food, around their lifestyle in general is healthier than ours. So even if they aren't getting the healthiest breakfast, even if it's a croissant or a biscuit and an espresso, like they're walking, they're, sitting down to enjoy their meals, they're eating fresher foods. So
And
it's
portion
different,
size, right? Portion
right?
size is really key. Like there is truth to like if you're someone who's trying to lose weight, well, you got to just lower your calories. Like there is truth to that. It's like, yeah, you want to be choosing foods that are good. You want to choose, like we've talked about, nutrient-dense foods versus just eating cookies and something like that, because you can definitely count calories and still eat just desserts, right? But it really is true. I mean, our portions here are humongous compared to most other countries.
Right, right. Yeah. A serving of pasta out at a restaurant here is different.
Very different. Yeah.
So before we wrap up, we touched on picky eating, but can you maybe give like a few examples of, you said, like maybe how you guys are doing things, or like what things do you keep on hand since you're trying to eliminate packaged foods in your homes that like your kids can just grab and snack on, that are easy go-tos, um, or any way to make it maybe that transition a little bit easier to people who are like, man, like this all sounds way too hard. What are like maybe a few things that I could do?
Yeah. So I try to I'm trying to make more things from scratch, but I try to keep it really simple. So like I was talking about like making your own beef jerky. So what I'll do is I'll freeze the meat that I'm going to use, and then you let it slightly defrost, but you cut it while it's frozen, because then you can cut it thinner, and it's usually easier to cut as well. And so I do that, and then I soak it just a little bit. I just need to get wet in some way so I can add a seasoning to it. But I soak it in a little bit of coconut aminos, and that also just gives it a little bit of sweetness. And then once I put it in a bowl, and I like put my favorite seasoning on. I usually use PLUCL because I also like that it has the organ meats, and I season the meat with that seasoning, and then I put it in a dehydrator or an oven that goes really low. I usually do it around 160, maybe 185 tops. And then it just goes for six hours. So it's not something that you're gonna preserve and leave out forever. Like most jerkies have a lot of like they've been preserved, so you could leave them out and they won't go bad, but this one would go bad if you left it out for too long. So, but that's okay. That's what we want. We want food that goes bad, because that
Mhm.
means then it doesn't have preservatives.
Yeah.
And so I just dehydrate it, and the kids love it. They love it more than anything I've ever bought in the store.
Hmm.
Like it's got a nice texture to it. It's dry enough, but it's not too hard. And I can keep it in the refrigerator to store it for like a week or two, and I can put it in their lunches and it's still fine.
Hmm.
Like they'll eat it for lunch. So that's a really good one. And then like something you can also do is just like when you're making, like a lot of times people will buy like sliced meats, and a lot of times those sliced meats are very processed though. So all you need to do is next time you're cooking like a brisket or you're cooking a chicken, like leave some where you can slice it into the size, thinly. Um, and then use that for sandwiches instead of the processed packaged meats. That's one thing I would do. I would, we're also, we're not gonna have like the the prepackaged crackers, which is I know is a popular one. So we're doing other things. We're using more seaweeds for to wrap things in. Um, where doing things like the way you cut a vegetable can kind of make it more like a chip, for example. So like instead of cutting your carrots where they're sticks, cut them really thinly, almost like they're like at an angle and they're like kind of like look like
Mm.
a round chip or something like that. So you can do that kind of stuff. You can do the same thing with cucumbers, daikon radish. Like you can kind of experiment with things that jicama is a really good one. Jicama is like you can cut it really thin and large, and it literally it it's got a really nice crunch and it doesn't have much of a flavor. So if you can put that with, whatever dip you want to give them. And then you can also sometimes make your own, like so you can like lightly toss these kind of rooted vegetables or something like that, whether it's beets or carrots or celiac or trying to think what else, like even broccoli stalks. You can do that kind of stuff, and you can just kind of lightly roast them and make chips of them yourselves.
Hmm.
Uh, Obviously, you can do it like with sweet potatoes and stuff like that too. Um, Trying to think what else. The hard-boiled egg one is one I'm really trying to get back to because an egg is like a perfect meal. So the more you can kind of do that, and if you need to make it more interesting, you can make it deviled eggs and, you know, season it the way that your kids are going to like it. Um, you can use even the meat if you have the meat cut thin enough. Um, well, there's actually some really cool stuff you can do if you have a meat, like a deli slicer. So some people are like, "Well, I don't carry that," but they sell like really small ones now that you could have in your household. And if you can freeze your meat and then cut it really thin like that, you can actually make your own kind of carnivore crisps. So
Mm.
you can actually take that meat that's been thinly sliced, you can season it and then just dehydrate it or low cook it, and it will turn into like a chip.
Hmm.
It's so good, and so easy to do, but you need something that will thinly slice it. Trying to think what else we're going to be doing. Oh, we will do some nuts. We're not going to do tons of nuts though, because nuts kind of are their own crutch, like where you just can get way too much fat just from eating nuts all the time and just kind of depend on those for your calories, which at least that's what happens with me. Uh, and Yeah, just mostly like you can, if you want to do kale chips, you can make those yourself. They're super easy to make. You could do that too. Because basically what you're doing is you're looking for those whole foods, right? But then you're also looking for different textures because that's ultimately what we're doing when we're doing crackers or stuff like that. You're really looking for a certain ease, like we talked about earlier. You just want something easy, but you're also looking for a texture, and then you're looking for sustenance, like something that's going to actually make them feel like they ate something. So
Hmm.
you just try to recreate that with other things, like with real food stuff. But we'll probably make our own crackers as well. You can easily make like your own Cheez-Its with you make them even gluten-free or sourdough like you've done. It's like you can do so many different things. But the key is just, batch it, like make a bunch and do it on a day when you can do it as a family and it's fun. Play some fun music and make it a way of connecting with the family as you do it.
Hmm. Yeah, batching and freezing is huge. It's even like I know I did this for postpartum, but even now sometimes I'll do it. Um, like when I'm making a certain meal, like I'll make double and like freeze half of it. Like right now I have already marinated like Mediterranean chicken skewer meat in the
Oh,
freezer.
that's
So like,
great.
well, because I just made a ton of the chicken, marinated it, and froze half. So I'm like, all right, then one night when I'm in a bind, or one day when I'm like, crap, I don't know what I'm going to make for dinner. I just have to thaw this and skewer it with
And
some veggies.
and that's a great lunch too, right? That's a great,
Yeah.
it's already cooked. And you just reminded me too, like something you see a lot of, like I know Costco sells them now, but you'll see those little like muffin quiches. That's something I used to do when I was out of culinary school, but they're so easy to make. It's basically um, make scramble eggs the way you would in a bowl and add all the different things you're going to want, whether it's bacon, cheese, whatever. And you just put them, instead of cooking them in a pan, you put them in a muffin tin that you sprayed so that it doesn't stick. And
I
then you have
sprayed
these,
it and it stuck so bad.
Really?
I was scrubbing it for days, like recently, and I was
Well,
like, what the heck?
let it get hot first then. So
Okay.
basically what you do is you stick the tin in, let it get hot first,
Hmm.
spray it, and then put it in. You don't want to spray it and then let it get hot because then it will just smoke. But if you let the
Okay.
pan get hot first, then it shouldn't stick.
Okay. I was like, never again am I making egg muffins because
But those are so easy to make. And once again, the egg is like this perfect food. So it's like, it's a great snack and you can add things to it. You can even do things like where you create your own kind of wisps in a sense. Like, so you're taking Parmesan or cheddar cheese and you can line the bottom of the muffin tin with that. So you're still
mm,
spraying it, but then
hmm.
you're lining it with the cheese and then you pour in the other stuff. And then it will create this kind of crispy outside,
Mm.
which is totally, like I said, I look at whenever I'm thinking about feeding people, I'm looking at it not only from a taste perspective, so those notes that we talked about, but I'm also thinking of it as a texture. So is it crispy? Is it pillowy, soft? Is it like crunchy? Crispy and crunchy are two different things. So it's like I'm just looking for what is the texture I want, and I'm making sure that's a varied texture because varied textures keep people interested in what they're eating. If it's always the same texture, you get bored really fast.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, and then for everybody listening, make sure you check out Pluck, the organ meat seasoning. I will have links to everything in the show notes. Um, Let people know. Do you want to let them know where they can find and follow you and learn more about all the things that you talk about?
Yeah, well, you can find us at eatpluck.com, and you can find us on socials at eatpluck, and myself at Chef James Berry. And we have tons of recipes on our website at the eatpluck.com. And most of them are focused on organ meats, but a lot of them are just regular recipes where we're showing you how you can just add pluck so easily. Pluck is a seasoning that has organ meats in it, so it's not only delicious, but it's nutritious as well.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you so much again for coming on for your time and energy today. Um, I refer back to your vasectomy episode a lot. People ask about that, so that was a fun one, but it's
That
always a
was fun.
pleasure to chat with you. So thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's so good talking to you again. Take care.